Good evening and welcome to the stpete.net Meetup. I'm your host, John Calloway. That is Clayton Hunt running all the tech for us. And with us this evening is Christos Matskas. Going to be talking about introduction to identity for developers.
We are indeed. Well, hi everyone, happy time zone. I know it's a weird time, it's 4 p.m. I haven't been, so it's 4 p.m. for me, so it's 7 p.m. for you, but
Yep.
I've never been at a 4 p.m. conference before, or maybe once. So for me, it's a weird time, but I love it. It's part of what we do anyway, so nice to be here. Thank you for having me. And yes, we are going to talk about identity. So this is a subject that is near and dear to my heart because I work as a developer advocate for Microsoft Identity. However, I do know that it is one of these weird topics that nobody wants to talk about. So it has a little bit of a niche where not many people want to go in depth on things and they don't want to really know how things work. And hopefully today we will demystify quite a few things while we do some demos and we show you the latest and greatest on the library. And explain what identity can do for you and how you should be approaching identity. That is very important because, as I said, it is a topic that has a lot of nuances and a lot of esoteric terms. So, things like tokens and OIDC and other stuff fly around and people just go, whoa, too much information. So do you want to start sharing my screen? Should we go through demos or do we have anything else to do for the intro?
We'll give it another minute or so. Sure. Just let people grab their pizza and their drink and find a seat.
Wait. There's pizza?
Yeah, well, it's on the table in the back.
Yeah, it's in the back conference room.
Let me go and get mine.
When we were in person, more than a year ago now.
Yes.
We, of course, regularly have some refreshments, often sponsored by local recruiting firms or other companies and such. So we're looking forward to get back in person when it's safe to do so. Until then, we'll be fully remote and doing the live stream. When we are back in person, we'll continue to do the live stream as well, so that we can be sure to allow others to view and participate. So if there are any questions at any point, feel free to ask them in chat. We'll make sure that we call them to Christos's attention. This is the stpete.net meetup. We do this every month, second Tuesday of the month, every month. We're continuing to look for additional speakers, additional topics. If you or a coworker or want to volunteer yourself or volunteer a coworker to speak, we would certainly love to have you. If you have a topic in mind that you would like to hear about, and want to make a suggestion, then feel free to drop a line in chat. We are broadcasting on the Six Figure Dev channel. We host the podcast, live stream the podcast at 6 p.m. Eastern on Mondays, and do live coding, live streaming on Wednesdays at 8 p.m. working on personal projects. And then we are hosting the stpete.net meetup as well. So plenty of opportunities to get involved, to participate, to drop a line in chat, to hang out, like and subscribe, and do all the things. So Christos, you're quite a ways away from Tampa, Florida. Who else
Indeed.
do we have in? Yeah, where are you these days?
I am in Seattle these days.
Okay.
At least I think I am. The Matrix is telling me that I am in Seattle.
Yeah.
And I haven't left the house in a long time, so things that may have changed in the area and I wouldn't know. Just kidding. Things are getting better. So yes, I am based in Redmond, so Pacific Northwest. The weather is nice today. Not as nice as in Tampa, I guess, but it's nice.
Yeah, so chat, drop a line in chat and let us know where you're joining us from. I see we've got Freaking Ward is up in Indiana. I know that. Who else we got in chat? Drop a line. Tell us where you're joining us from.
Feels
How is the weather?
Oh, the weather's great here. I don't know what it was today, like 80s.
Yes. As I get older, I feel that I would like to spend more time in warm weather. I used to be a winter person, like I love snow. But at the same time, I'm thinking I'm too old to go snowboarding. And by old, I mean frail and accident prone. So my wife has said you can't go snowboarding anymore because every time you come back, you have some weird accident happen to you. So I'm like, okay, if I can't enjoy the snow, I might as well enjoy the sunshine and be in shorts all year round. So thinking about moving to a warmer climate.
Nice. And we've got Base Bleem from Bradenton, and Scum Sprocket is in St. Pete. Just started their first time dev job this week. So congrats.
Wow, congrats, man. That's good.
All right, we're just about 10 minutes past the hour. I think that's probably given folks enough time to grab their Pizza, food, their drinks, and find their seats. So we'll turn it over to Christos.
I wonder if I should have brought a beer for this one, just to get us going, right? Okay, identity. Why not, right? Microsoft Identity, anything that has to do with identity. And it's one of these subjects that actually permeates everything that you do. In fact, there's very few chances that you will probably be doing something in your code and will not be touching identity. It might not be authentication directly, but it could be reaching out to other resources securely. So if you are running on Azure, for example, you need to call, say, Cosmos or SQL or storage, you need to somehow authenticate that service and access those resources. So authentication happens in many places, and identity is one of these things that doesn't just live in Azure. We might be Azure AD, but it's neither Azure nor AD. We're an identity provider for anyone, no matter where you're running. So today we're going to be covering some basic things about why you should not be managing your own user databases, which is very important. And then we'll go into how you can do it right, why you should be doing it in this way, what kind of decisions do you need to make, and what does it take for a developer to implement identity in a few steps. My goal leaving this session is for you to understand that first, you shouldn't be writing your own databases because trust me, it's a hard thing to do. I've tried and I failed. Lots of people have tried and failed. I didn't make the news. Some of them made the news. And so please don't write your own databases. And if you would decide, and I convinced you not to do that, then the next step is to use Microsoft Identity because of the things that it offers to you as a developer and for your company as well and what have you. So there are a lot of implications, but the decision tree should be simple. And from your perspective as a developer, you shouldn't be spending 3 months learning about OpenID Connect, OAuth 2, flows, tokens, and all these things that make your life a lot more complex. So let's get started. If you like what you see, by the way, and if you want to learn more about identity, then you can find me at the 4 to 5 show. We actually stream as well every Tuesday and every Friday at 8 a.m. Pacific time. But we also have an IT focused stream as of 2 weeks ago. So on Wednesdays at 8 a.m., we also do a stream for IT people, like how do they manage Azure AD, how they configure the things that you as a developer are going to benefit from. And then, I do user groups and conferences and other things. And you can find me on Twitter as well. So if you want to reach out to me, I'm always available on Twitter for identity and Azure related questions. Okay, so I did say that before, and I will say it again. We don't want you to create or store your users' passwords and identities on your own system for many, many reasons. First and foremost, it's hard to do the security right. It's hard to get implementation done correctly. In fact, if anything has to be proven or can be proven by this site over here, is that all these companies thought that they could do it better, and all these companies made the news because their user databases ended up in some public dumps. If you follow Troy Hunt, he's a security expert from Australia. He's got this fantastic website called Have I Been Pwned? And there you can actually go and register your email address or your email addresses if you have multiple. And you can find out whether your email address has ever made the news. Why is that important? Why, you might say, well, I've only used Adobe 5 years ago and I don't really care about that. There are some patterns when it comes to user identities and usernames and passwords, and in general, human nature. We tend to be quite lazy and we tend to prefer convenience over security. So many of us have used and reused passwords and emails across multiple accounts. I will be the first one to raise my hand and say I've done it. And if I were to ask, if we're in the same room and I were to ask you, some of you will silently raise your hand and say, yeah, I used my Gmail account and the same password. I've got a pattern. And the problem with that is that if you use email accounts and identities across multiple providers, let's say Adobe and then Netflix and Facebook, then attackers are also clever enough to not only hack one side, but they will take that information that they hacked and they will try incrementally to go to all the known websites, try your username and password to see whether they will land or not. And if you're not using a password manager with strong passwords, it means that eventually one of these accounts will be found somewhere else. And again, you might say, well, that's not a problem. Somebody will sign in with my account. But we know, for example, that people have used that, or attackers have used that in the past on Facebook, where they would go sign in as yourself. And then they would say, I have been in a terrible accident. I lost my wallet. Please wire me some money. And eventually that ended up being a $250 million issue, according to the FBI. So as you can see, they're benefiting from your laziness, or from our laziness, or from the laziness of the developers that implemented some identity at Sony or Dropbox, and your account ended up in one of these dumps. So make sure you check your account and make sure to start using a password manager and not to reuse your passwords. Cyber attacks are happening. They're happening more increasingly faster and with more vengeance. And it doesn't take long. These days, anything that you put out on the web will become a target. Every time you write some software and makes it in a public domain, whether that's an Azure web app or AWS or anything that can be accessed, it will be scanned for vulnerabilities. And one of these vulnerabilities is checking for weak accounts or checking for accounts that can be used to hijack the system. So security is hard. We have 1,500 engineers and another 1,000 PMs working hard, so you don't have to work hard in implementing identity. Just to prove the point, in 2007, I gained a contract for one of the prominent UK universities, and I was asked to build a CMS for them. Now, CMSs are cool, but rather than me being mature enough to make the right decisions, I decided to write my own CMS because I can write it better than the big frameworks out there. So screw WordPress, I can write it better. So not only that, but I also implemented my own identity system. So you think it's simple, right? It's just a username and a password. Okay, let's start with that. Now, the first decision you have to make is, how do I store these securely? Okay, I know hashing is better than encryption. In fact, hashing is the recommended way of storing passwords. But now you start thinking about rainbow attacks, and you start thinking about weak hashing algorithms. And do you know which ones are weak and which ones are not weak? They might not be weak today, but they might be weak in a year down the line because computing power increases faster. So suddenly you have to think about, how do I make it good? Okay, we'll use bcrypt because that's the recommended way. Let's go with 7 iterations of creating a hash. We store it securely. Now I have to think about password resets. How do you protect against password reset attacks? Like, what happens if that email gets intercepted? That's a problem. So now you have something about this logic. Then you add other things like multi-factor authentication. Okay, ASP.NET provided a framework to do that, but you had to implement a lot of components yourself. And there are still some issues that you might find there as you implement that. And now you have dependencies on other services as well. So it becomes a very complex solution. There is a slide somewhere in our deck. I don't have it with me today, but it shows how complex Azure AD is behind the scenes. When I saw that slide, I was like, man, there's like 25 to 30 different components, all doing different things like conditional access, two-factor authentication, storing the data and managing user metadata and what have you. It's just insane. So it's very hard to get it right. I'll tell you this. And all these companies that tried out there, trust me, they were not naive. They had engineering capacity. They had people that thought they could do it better, but eventually they made the news. And we don't want you to make the news. We want you to fall in the pit of success when it comes to identity. And Casalo, which is at the very bottom, is probably one of the last ones, or Casalo, I don't know how to pronounce it. It's an Indonesian company. It's a finance company that made the news because they put their data in an insecure Azure storage account. So 500 1,000 accounts made available because it was an insecure storage account. You might say, well, Chris, that doesn't have to do anything directly with identity, but yes and no. It's how people can make the news for not doing things properly, especially when it comes to securing access to resources. And identity is the first line of defense of many layers. Okay, so let's move on to the next slide, because enough slides. So at Microsoft, we have the Microsoft Identity Platform, which comprises of many components, but predominantly it's Azure Active Directory for organizations and B2C for non-organizational accounts. And as you can see here, just Azure AD, just that nice number at the very bottom over there, we do 30 billion authentications per day. That is an insane amount of number. I had to check with marketing because, sometimes like they put numbers down there, they don't check it's a B or an M. It's like, are you sure it's not an M, it's a B? They said, yes, it is a B. It's actually 30 billion plus. So it could be 35. And the whole point there is that we have an insane amount of data. And that data also helps us to protect you as a developer and you as a systems integrator when it comes to using Azure AD for authentication or Microsoft Identity. Because how many of you have received emails from Microsoft saying, hey, somebody tried to log in Germany with your account? And that notification alone is very important because, first of all, I know I was not in Germany at the time that somebody tried to sign in, sitting here in Seattle. And the second one is that I can actually check and go and check at what time and at which system they tried to do that. We actually call that "Who am I?" or "It wasn't me." So the "It wasn't me" feature actually allows you to go into My Apps. If you search for My Apps and Microsoft, it signs you to your own portal, and then that gives you a full list of all your accounts that have been used or you use and how you can see their behavior. So it's very important that not only that we have a lot of data, but we also scale. And now you might say, well, my solution doesn't scale above 100 users or 10 users. That's absolutely fine. But you as a developer have never, ever, ever to worry about how is my identity solution going to scale. One of the biggest problems that we see with companies that implemented their own, say, MongoDB database with Node.js and they're managing their own user accounts is that, especially for large organizations, these databases are littered all over the organization. So somebody creates an Angular app and they create some MongoDB backend, then somebody else creates an ASP.NET app and uses some SQL Server database for users. And that goes around, and then eventually you end up with hundreds of databases that maintain different and inconsistent user data and user identities. And that is a big problem for organizations. Big problem from managing those databases, scaling out, big problems from securing those databases, backups and your stores and what else. And then big problem for maintaining identity consistency. I've been in companies where people had left and then 2 years later, they could still access production systems because their accounts were never deleted or their credentials were never rolled. And that means that it's very hard. Whereas with Azure AD, for example, you have one central location. Your IT team can say, well, Christos has left the company, so wipe it out. And from that point on, they cannot access any organizational resources. You may think about the fact that, well, let's say I am right here with you. I've signed into my Azure portal, and then suddenly I get fired and somebody removes me. I still have an access token sitting in my cache somewhere, which gives me access to how long that access token lifetime is. The default is an hour. So worst case scenario, in an hour, my token will expire. But we're working on stuff that I will show you how we are addressing this issue of this long life of tokens, because some companies went, we don't want that to happen. So we'll take the lifespan of that access token down to 10 minutes. And now you're calling Azure AD all the time behind the scenes, but it's fine. We scale with your solution. That's all I want you to remember from this slide. Whether you have 1 million or 10 billion accounts, we will scale with you. So how do you get started? Well, first of all, if your manager comes to you and says, hey, Mike, I want you to go and build me this solution with Angular, and we want people to sign in. In fact, maybe not even sign in. If we can do single sign-on, that's even better. So can you do it? Like the first question in your mind will be, okay, do we have anything right now that does identity for us? And if you are using Office 365 or Microsoft 365, and if you have or if you have an Azure subscription, you already have an Azure AD tenant sitting there waiting for you. All your users have been onboarded and they're ready to be used. So saving costs aside, right? So you already have an Azure AD tenant, it's available to you, let's go. What's next? The next question for you as a developer would probably be, how easy is it to add authentication to my application? Do I need to know all the minute details of OAuth 2 and OpenID Connect and understand the flows? Most likely I would say no, you don't have to. And in terms of coding implementation, even in other languages outside .NET, we provide you with everything you need so you can do it in a few lines of code, literally a few lines of code. I want to say a few, it's like less than 20. And if you are using .NET, we can do it in a single line of code, and I will show you how you can achieve that. Next is integrating with platform languages and tools. So we support most of the major frameworks and languages. So Java, Node, JavaScript, .NET, Python. We're there, we support you. If we don't have a library for you, if we don't have an MSAL library, which we will see in a second, then there's a very good chance there's an OAuth 2 or OpenID Connect compliant library, an open source library for you. So you can use that. We're built on top of standards. And then Visual Studio, Azure, Visual Studio Code, any of these tools will also benefit from identity, as we will see. It depends on which level of integration you have or what is your ecosystem. If you are fully Microsoft, then there are so many added benefits. And finally, the advanced security capabilities. That is very important. And I think this is the key. This is like the last nail in the coffin here, because this is what sells it for me. Multi-factor authentication, I don't have to write a single line of code to implement that. Somebody in the IT team will go and configure Azure AD for me. And then all I have to do is just carry on as it is. And all my users will be prompted for MFA. Do I want integration with things like hardware keys, like FIDO keys? Yes, that's all supported. I don't have to write explicit code for that. How about conditional access? What if we were to say, I don't want anyone to access the system after 6 p.m., it needs to be locked down. Or I don't want anyone to access this application outside of the US because they shouldn't have access to this data, right? This is all available to you as a developer for free. You don't have to write explicit code. Now, imagine if you had to implement conditional access in code. Imagine what it would take for you to say, right, every time that something comes in, I need to check the incoming request and I need to work out whether they should have access or not based on their IP address. And then you have a giant lookup table, and then those IP addresses can be everywhere. It's insane. You don't have to do anything. You get it for free. And then I talked about access lifetime, token lifetime, and how would you deal with these things. We're currently working with an industry consortium and the standards committee to ratify the conditional access evaluation protocol, right? Something that will say to you or your app, hey, somebody has presented an access token. Should I give them access? They could have left the company or something has changed. So I need to escalate and revalidate the token. So this is coming as part of the platform, which means that you as a developer don't have to worry about token lifetimes. It can be a 30-day lifetime on your token, but if that person leaves the company, that token should be invalidated straight away. And there will be code implementation, there will be support for you to do that. Maybe 2 lines of code to that to add that capability for .NET, as I saw from the samples. It's amazing. Like, we had so many discussions with so many companies about how do we manage the life cycle of the tokens and how do we make the experience good for the user. Like, we don't want to prompt the user for signing every time they go from one page to another, or every time they try to sign in that they have already consented to. So doing this behind the scenes, it's an amazing experience. And these are the things that you get for free. Again, you as a developer don't have to worry about that. I love that. So yeah, I'm just gonna skip that one because that's boring marketing stuff. And next I want to talk about integration. Like, what does it take? But now I convinced you, right? Now you're like, okay, I'm sold. I want all these features. I want it to be awesome. I want to write my 1 line of code. So how do I do it? The first thing that we have to do is to create an app registration. In fact, I did a blog post yesterday on integrating between Twitch and a Blazor server app. So somebody out there in the community said, we're struggling, right? I'm trying to sign in my users using Twitch. So they will go to Twitch, they will get their ID token, and I get that token back in my app. And now I know they've signed in. And how do I do it? Well, the first thing they have to do is you have to go to the Twitch developer platform, and they have to create an app. You have to create an app to say, hey, I'm intending to use you as an identity provider. It's the exact same thing for the Microsoft Identity Platform. You have to go into Azure AD and say, I'm going to create an app registration. We call it an app registration. I'm registering an app which I'm going to use for authenticating my users. That shows intent. In there, you can say it's a web app, it's a mobile app, and we'll give you different configuration settings based on that. But that's it. Like, you create the app registration, you give it a name, you say, where do you want to receive your tokens, and done. And you can do that in the portal. You can have a very nice UI experience, or you can programmatically configure that through the Graph API, PowerShell. I will show you I will have a link to those samples. In fact, if you go to the 425, so dev.to, dev.2, you'll find all the blogs that we've done in the past, but I will provide you with the links later. So now that we have the app registration, the next step is to write some code. Some code. I say very little code. In comparison to what I had to write in 2007 for my CMS, this is nothing. So So we have libraries, or you can use any library you want. It's any OpenID Connect compliant library, or anything that is built on OpenID Connect certified endpoints will work. Azure Active Directory is actually built on top of OpenID Connect and OAuth 2. So any library will work. But if you're very new to identity, and if you're going to use Microsoft Identity, then why not use MSAL? So we have the MSAL library, the Microsoft Authentication Library, available on most of the languages that I mentioned before, Objective-C, Android, or Java. We have one for Android. We also have one for Java directly. Then we have things like .NET. We just released a Node a week ago, and I'll be doing a stream after this one on using Node.js with MSAL.js for Node to authenticate against Azure AD. And then, JavaScript, single page apps and what have you. And we even have extensions for React or components for React and Angular, so you don't have to write your own wrappers around them if you're doing single page apps. So now that you have the library, and now that you have the app registration, there's a small chance that you might want to go back to Azure AD to configure APIs. It's API first design. It's very common these days. So your front end, let's say it's a single page app written with React, needs to authenticate your users, and then needs to go and get an access token to call those APIs to get the data. And those APIs can be your APIs. It can be the Microsoft Graph API that gives you access to things like SharePoint, OneDrive, CRM, Dynamics, all the data systems under the Microsoft ecosystem. Or it can be Azure. Like, I want to access Azure Storage, I need to get a token for that. Identities. We talked about identities, and we talked about users and how you create them and how you should be managing them, or the fact that you shouldn't be managing them yourself. It should be on the Azure AD portal. But when it comes to authenticating users, you have a decision to make. And that decision mainly depends on who this user is, who that identity is going to be. So if you have people that are going to be signing in as part of your organization, so let's say at Contoso, at Microsoft, at whatever company, at a six-figure company, right? Then these are all internal users that you need to sign in. And for that, we use Azure AD. So that's Azure Active Directory for work or school accounts, line of business apps, internal things. Nobody can access them from external accounts. Then you have the other side of things, which is, hey, I'm building an app that I want external users or customers to come in and sign in, create a profile, and buy stuff or speak to me, like a forum, right? If you're creating a forum for your World of Warcraft friends or whatever, or you create a mobile app for tracking your gym fitness, and then you want other people to use the same app as well. You want them to create a profile and create them a personalized experience. And that's where Azure Active Directory B2C comes in. think of B2C, the business to consumer kind of thing, as a username and password database with the ability to bring social media logins. So out of the box, you get a username and a password sign in, but you can also enable and integrate Twitch or Facebook or any other OpenID Connect provider to come in and become an identity provider for you. So B2C acts as a proxy, and then the users come in and say, I want to sign in with Twitter. So they click on the Twitter button and they get redirected to Twitter. The sign in, Twitter redirects back to B2C, and then B2C says, okay, you've authenticated. I know that you came from Twitter and you're all good. So let me issue you with an ID token and let you into the system. And that's the beauty. So 2 systems to decide from. I mean, there are in-betweens and there are more complex scenarios like business to business, but I don't want you to think about that for now. If you're creating an app for internal users, then that's your Azure AD. If you're creating an app for external users, that's B2C. Simple as that. And by the way, the code remains the same, so it doesn't change. It's the endpoints that change between B2C and Azure AD. So technically, it's more or less the same endpoints, just different configuration settings. Industry standards, that's the important bit here, is that we don't have anything proprietary. We support OpenID Connect, OAuth 2, SAML, and Scheme. So you as a developer don't have to worry about, if I build something today, do I need to change stuff in the future? What will happen if OAuth 2 goes to OAuth 3? Then how will I inherit that? We'll have to write everything. The nice thing is that for most of our libraries, we do provide you with backwards compatibility or seamless upgrade. So when we moved from MSAL.js 1.0 to 2.0 with support for Pixie and authorization code, moving away from implicit flows, which was insecure, you didn't have to do a single line of code change. It all worked out of the box. Just upgrade the NuGet package or your NPM package and it just works. So we're hard at work to make sure that the experience doesn't break. So for our first demo, because enough of me talking, let's go do some demos. I'm going to start unconventionally. I'm going to go first to the Azure Active Directory portal. So I am in the Azure Active Directory portal. You'll notice that the URL is slightly different. It says Azure AD, aadportal.azure. So that's a shortcut. I jump directly into Azure. I don't have to deal with, I jump directly into the Azure AD portal. I don't have to deal with Azure. But I could just go back into Azure and go to Active Directory from there. So here I have my Azure Active Directory, and I'm going to create a single page app registration. So the first thing I need to do is go to the app registrations and say, I want to create a new registration. So here I'm going to do this, and we're going to call it 6dev spa. You can have spaces, you can have dashes, whatever you want to, whatever kind of format you want to follow. Then here, supported account types, I need to make a decision about what kind of users I want to sign in. Now, this is Azure AD, so we don't have loads of options. But the big difference here is the single tenant. Only people in my organization, only people in my tenant can sign in, or I can create a multi-tenant app where anyone with an Azure AD tenant can actually sign in to my app. So that means that you can create your next office where anybody can buy a license and suddenly they can start using your app. They don't have to rewrite everything from scratch. They just use yours. They can sign with their own accounts. They don't have to be part of my org. Same for Visual Studio Online or the what do you call it these days? Azure DevOps. It is Azure DevOps these days. Man, we change name every so often. So anyway, or you can also enable, the nice thing down here is you can also have Microsoft accounts. Live accounts, do you remember those? The Xbox account, your Outlook, your Hotmail, anything that it is. You can also allow that as well as Azure Active Directory users or just live accounts. I don't know anyone that has used Azure AD for that alone. It's a weird use case, but anyway. Now, I'm not going to change anything in here. I'm just going to say register. So very little stuff so far. And then instead of trying to work out what's happening here, I'm just going to go into the quick start and say, hey, you know what? I want to create a single page app. And the nice thing here is that it says, well, what kind of app are you going to use, or what kind of SPA framework do you want to use? And you have JavaScript with auth code flow, which is the latest and the one that you should be using. You have JavaScript with implicit flow, let's say Yak. Don't use that if you can. And if you have one, please upgrade to auth code with Pixie. Then we have Angular and React, so dedicated components that will support you. And then Blazor Wasm. So if you are dabbling with Blazor Wasm these days, then you can use this one. It will download and configure it for you. So let's go Java with auth code, latest and greatest, right? This is vanilla JavaScript, nothing fancy. So let's see what we need. First, it will say, I need to make some changes. And these changes predominantly are where you're going to get your tokens. So it says, well, once the user sign in, where do you want me to send the tokens back? So here, it configures that for us. It's a port 3000 on localhost because we're going to download and run the app on the local 3000 port. And it's a Node.js app, so nothing fancy. So I'll make that update. And then as well with that, it will also add some configuration settings in the code. So when I download, I'm able to press F5 and the whole thing will run for me and prompt me for authentication. So let's go and download the sample. So I haven't done any coding so far. It's just me playing around with the samples or the quick start, right? So here now I need to go into my projects and paste that there, and then I will open it in code so we can all see the glory of this simple app. So I'm replacing the files, and then I'm going into here. Okay. Let me clear this and change directory. And it should be cdms identity JavaScript, and then I will open it with code. So what do we have here? We have, this is not right. Yeah, some leftover files. So here we have our server, which is our node server running on port 3000. Yes, we know that. That's also configured. So this maps. If this doesn't match, if our application is running on 3001 and the token is supposed to return to 3000, then there's a mismatch and the authentication fails. So you don't get your token. That protects your app as well. That protects your users from getting their token sent somewhere else that hasn't been configured. And from an authentication perspective, there are two files that we care about mostly. There's an auth config, which has the MSAL configuration settings. And in here we have a client ID. That client ID matches our client ID here in the quick start. Sorry, if we go here to the overview, and if I put this to the side, and if I open this and close that for more space, you'll notice it's 4198 or 4194. We have 4194. Then the authority is login, and with my tenant. So it says every time somebody needs to log in, they need to go to that tenant. It's a single tenant app. And finally, we say here that the redirect URI should be the same as the one that we configured here. So see, they are the same. I can have multiple here, by the way. So I can have one for test and one for prod and one for QA. So the other settings here, you can technically ignore. This is for where do you want your MSAL cache to live. And that also defines how your single sign-on will work or whether your sessions will be shared. So if I sign in, if I store it in my session, then that means that if I open another browser, I will already be signed in. Sorry, another browser window or tab, I'll be signed in. But if I were to store it somewhere else in one of the other options, then that means that I might not get access across multiple windows. So that defines on how MSAL will behave. And finally, logger. Again, you can ignore that. You can remove the whole thing. That thing will still work. So let's close it. Let's put it on the side. Let's maximize this window here as well. And then we have the auth pop-up. This is where all the magic takes place. This is where we're doing the sign-in. So first we need to instantiate the MSAL object. That's the thing that will handle the authentication for us. And then we have a sign-in, which is 3 lines, or 2 lines if we ignore the catch, right? So it's this. And here we say MSAL object, just present a pop-up with the settings that we have in the login request, the appropriate settings. And that's all it is. And then if everything's successful, it changes the UI to say, welcome, you're signed in now. If there's an error, just displays the error. For the sign out, we have even less. We have 1 line of code. So there you go. That's 3 lines of code for sign in, sign out. There's a little bit more code to go and get tokens for accessing stuff like graph. And in this instance, we have one that actually presents you with a pop-up. It tries to get a token for you based on your username. So it takes the user and then it uses that user to go and grab the token. And this pattern is very consistent. It will always try to do it silently. So it doesn't prompt the user, but if it doesn't find a token in the cache, if it needs to re-authenticate or if it needs to get a new consent because the scopes have changed, then it will prompt you for an interactive session. And it will throw a very expected error message. So you do silently, then you catch the error, you check whether the error is of a specific instance or a specific type. In some other languages, you might check at a specific error code. And then if it is of that, I need to interactively authenticate the user. Then we'll present you with a pop-up, which is up here, there. And it will acquire the token and then pass it back to whatever. In this instance, we're using graph to go and get some extra information for the user. Okay, so that is all it is to do. There's also a redirect option. So if you don't want to present a pop-up, you can use the redirect option in your code. Some browsers don't handle pop-ups. I think Safari and mobile are not particularly good if you're using Safari. So redirect is recommended for those scenarios. But in any case, you can define what the user experience will be like. So all we have to do now is run the app and see what happens. Let's see how the magic happens. Do we have any questions so far? Nope. I think the only question we had was around getting the samples, which we'll make available.
Yeah, so, we did have one. So Sam joined late and was asking about JWTs and MS Identity Stack.
Oh, yeah. Well, how would I like to hear about JWTs and the MS Identity Stack? Well, I tend not to go too much into JWTs on the first intro because I did mention access tokens, right? So technically, the MSA library would take care of most of the work for you, which means that you have to do one thing is getting the ID token when somebody signs in. That's the ID token that gets presented to your app. And then if your app needs to access additional resources, then it needs to get an access token for those resources. And this is what happens here. In fact, the pop-up, the get token redirect here, the get token pop-up that we had before, it will do exactly that. It will say, what is the request? What kind of token do you need? And then it will try to get it from your app. The nice thing about MSAL 2.0 or the latest version is that it also does dynamic consent. So you don't have to predefine those scopes and your app can dynamically go and request them when it needs them. So both ID tokens and access tokens are in the form of a JWT, which is the standard format for tokens. They are consistent. Once you grab your token, you can use JWT.ms to go and crack it open and see what happens. And the identity stack, I suppose, this is what we're doing right now. We're looking at Azure AD. And the code that you see here will be identical if we were doing the same stuff with B2C. So no difference there from a code perspective. So now that we have all our NPM installed, the packages, we can run it. NPM start. So it's listening at port 3000. So let's go and bring that port to view or that in the browser window. So localhost 3000. And check this out. No much code here, or it's not particularly pretty, but it works. And there's a sign in button. So let's see what happens when I click that. There you go. It says, which account do you want to sign in? I love the fact that I've already signed into most of these. So I don't have to sign in again. And the first thing I am presented after I almost complete the authentication is the consent. We need to give permissions to the app to look at my data. And in this instance, it's only looking for my profile information, which is the standard OpenID Connect information. And it also asks for a refresh token. So if we need to go back and refresh, then it will do it for us. So these are the scopes that we asked by default. So nothing tricky, it's just accessing my profile. So I will accept it. You can see because I'm an admin on my tenant, I can also consent on behalf of the whole org. I'm not going to do that. So let's accept that one. And now I can see my profile. See, I'm signed in. The UI has changed slightly, and now I can see my profile, which is a test tenant. It doesn't have any real data, because if I try to do this on the Microsoft tenant, it will say, no, you're not allowed to show your emails on demos. Don't be silly. That's your corporate emails. So it will block it, actually. The IT team, or MSIT, has gone and proactively protected me from my own stupidity. So it won't allow me to do that. So I need to use a test tenant, and you can get a test tenant for free on the Microsoft 365 developer tenant. So if you haven't seen this before, Microsoft 365 developer, if I can type, developer program. With this program, anyone can get an E5 license for Azure AD, and that means that you can actually do anything you need, or a P2 if I remember correctly. That means that you have full access to all the features that Azure AD offers you for free for 90 days. And as long as you use it once in these 90 days, your sample data and everything else will continue to live forever and ever and ever. So that's an everlasting Microsoft 365 developer tenant that you get for free, just to go around and play. So that's what I'm using for most of my demos, which is perfect. And it comes with sample data. You get graph data, you get emails, you get calendar, you get everything. And it actually refreshes, so it doesn't have stale data. So if I say, hey, read me my emails right now. Oh, check this out. Now, remember, I only consented to my profile, right? I said, I only want to give you access to my profile. Now that it tries to access my email, which is, the permission is read.mail or mail.read, I need to reconsent. If I don't want to give it access to my email, this is where we part ways, and this app can't do anything more, and I don't see my data, but at least I don't get access to that. It's very similar to what your phone will do every time you download a new app. It says, this app wants to access your pictures. And you're like, wait a minute, this is my calendar app. Why would it need to access my pictures? And you decide whether you want to give it access or not. And we need to be upfront, both as developers and as users. We need to know what's happening in the app. So that's the consent framework over here. So let's accept this. Now I can get my emails. Isn't that beautiful? Very few lines of code, right? And that's the JavaScript framework. That's all it takes. There are obviously more advanced scenarios, but from a sign in, sign out, and from acquiring tokens perspective, it's quite simple once you have everything set up. I know I make it sound too easy, but it doesn't take much more. Like, I'm doing a demo with a very good friend of mine from the UK, and he's building the Xamarin app where I am building the backend API, to call it. And I was saying to him, look, this is all you need to do. There's like 5 lines of code here, some config settings there, and it will work. So he tried it last night while I was in bed, and he's like, dude, it worked, and I couldn't believe it. I thought there was something wrong with it because it didn't throw any error messages. I was like, well, when you know how to set it up, it's fairly straightforward and it works. It's when you don't know, or when things go wrong, that it becomes a little bit of a nightmare. But the onboarding for SPAs is easy, or SPAs. And then we'll do the demos with .NET so I can show you what else is happening there. So next I want to talk about a little bit about the platform and the frameworks and the language that you want to use. So if you like to dabble with Python and use PyTorch to develop, or any other tool, then we will support you as well. In fact, the next slide is quite controversial because it has nothing of Microsoft other than the identity at the very top. So identity sits at the very top, but we do provide support, and we support all these services. Like, I don't care if you're running on AWS. We don't really care if you're running on DigitalOcean. I don't really care if you're running on Kubernetes or bare metal, and I don't really mind which ID you use. In fact, we are working with JetBrains to integrate Azure Active Directory extensions into their tooling. Rider already has it. We did that back in September. So if you're using Rider, the Azure Toolkit comes with an Azure Active Directory extension that allows you to quickly create an app registration and add the code to your solution. We're also working on the IntelliJ API, ID, so that you can do the same exact thing in IntelliJ. So as you can see, we're more than welcoming of external communities. So, let's say you're running on AWS, you can still secure your apps, you can still benefit from even managed identities using Azure Arc, which is insane, and benefit from all the goodness that comes with Microsoft Identity. But if you are running on the Microsoft Identity platform, also if you're running on the Microsoft ecosystem, then there's so much more goodness that you can get. And in fact, I would probably need another 3-4 hours to talk about all the other aspects of identity that you could benefit from. Starting with deep integration with your developer tools. So Visual Studio and Visual Studio Code require you now to sign in, or they prompt you for a sign in. I think Visual Studio is mandatory for your licensing, but Visual Studio Code does not force you for a sign in. But the nice thing about that is that once you sign in, that account can be used to access things like Azure services via the Azure SDKs, the Azure Identity SDK. You can also benefit from easily pulling data from SharePoint and Exchange. I did a project 3-4 years ago when I was trying to integrate OneDrive to a mobile app. And oh my God, OneDrive had its own SDK. What's it called? Was it SkyDrive back then? Even back in those days, right? Maybe 5 years ago. And I was trying to do it, and it had its own SDK and had its own sign-in process. It had its own, closed ecosystem. It was a nightmare. And then it had like its own API to pull the data. Now I can sign in once and pass that access token back to my my Graph client, and the Graph client will say, well, you want to access your OneDrive, just go ahead and do it. Or do you want to access somebody else's OneDrive to go and do some processing overnight as an app, like as a daemon service? Then you can also do that, which is amazing, right? One API to rule them all. And then all the other Azure services. In fact, as I said, later on tonight, I'll be doing a stream on a Node.js API accessing Cosmos without knowing the key or the secret to Cosmos, just the URL. And we'll use my identity when I develop locally, and we'll use my my managed identity when it runs in the cloud without changing a single line of code. That is insane. You as a company never ever have to think about what are my users doing with my or my developers doing with secrets. And as we know, developers can be an attack vector as well. People will store secrets to APIs on Post-it notes. They will put them in virtual Post-its on their PC. They will put it in a notepad. They will use the secrets file for .NET, .NET user secrets, create or add new. Like, hey, it's secure. Sure, it's secure. It's like, plain text under your profile. I love it. And all these things, right? So we want you to never, ever have to think about rolling keys or managing keys or managing access to resources via secrets. Secretless apps is the next most exciting topic I love to talk about. And it is underpinned by identity, using managed identities and what have you. So you can see how many benefits there are there. And then if you're in the Power Apps, Power Platform kind of a dude or gal that you like to build solutions with these things, they will also benefit from identity because they can either authenticate to Azure Active Directory and call your custom APIs, or they can use that identity to call directly into first-party APIs like Teams or Power Data and what have you. That closed ecosystem, it's brilliant. You don't get anywhere else because we care both for your developer tools, not both. We care for your developer tools, we care for your languages, we care for the platform and for the identity, all in one. Skip this one. It just talks about other features with Azure AD. I did mention that we're building on top of OpenID Connect and OAuth. We even bring SAML integration. So if you are building SaaS or ISV apps that you want to sell, and then you can get verified as a publisher, and then you can use SAML for them to integrate. So Salesforce integrates directly with Azure AD via SAML. And finally, mobile single sign-on. This is amazing, but once you tune your devices, whether it's Android or iOS, and I have my iOS here, it has probably my homepage is littered by Microsoft apps, and I don't ever have to sign in. And if I have to even sign in, the Microsoft Authenticator pops up. I use my biometric to sign into that, and then it automatically signs me into my apps. So I don't even know my domain password. In fact, I haven't used it in forever because on my main machine, I use hello. And then on my phone, the password authenticator and single sign-on takes care of everything else. So you as an enterprise can provide a fantastic experience to your users. You can manage their devices and remotely wipe them out. And me as a user never ever have to think about my password. I can't even remember the last time I had to actually use a password, and it's somewhere in my password manager. Okay, And then even if I lose it, then SSPR will make it easy for me. I can just go into the SSPR website and single or self-serve password reset, SSPR. So I can reset my own password. I don't think my MSIT team ever heard of us saying I need to fix my password. So we talked about MSAL. We talked about how it is secure by default. So everything happens over HTTPS. And we do bring you the latest security policies and features with quick iterations. So MSAL v2.0 uses the v2 endpoints, the latest MSAL's libraries. MSAL v2 for JavaScript also benefits from authorization code with PXE, so you don't have to worry about that. And by PXE, I mean PKC, which is proof code for key exchange. And finally, Graph and Azure all come together to allow you to build richer experiences for your users. So B2C, I mentioned B2C before, but one of the biggest benefits of B2C, unlike Azure AD, is the configurability of the UI. So the sign-in pages were actually created with B2C. And the whole point here is that the user doesn't feel like they leave your app to go somewhere else to sign in and come back, even though they do that on the browser. The experience remains consistent across the board. So full power to create custom pages. And just last week, we updated all the templates for those custom pages to have the latest jQuery and handlebars. Yes, I did say jQuery. We still use that. I don't know why, but hey, it's the latest. It is the latest supported jQuery with all the security features addressed and or security issues addressed. And handlebars for rendering your pages. They're standard templates, but they're fully configurable. You can write your own JavaScript. And then, as I said, it's not just for signing in users or signing up users. You can build elaborate solutions and businesses around that. You can have APIs. You can have different front ends that call those APIs. And the users can bring their own identities there. They don't have to use the @Contoso library or create a brand new one because there is identity fatigue. Let's switch gears. Let's move to .NET because up until this point, I've been talking about identity in general, but I know that people like to talk about .NET as well, so why not? So .NET has moved in strides since I joined last year in March. I don't know if that's a coincidence. I'm just kidding. I'm not taking any credit for the hard work that the team has done, but if you ever had to do identity in ASP.NET, then you probably have experienced this where you say, file new project in Visual Studio, and then it says, do you want to do authentication? You check the box, and then it says, do you want to use Azure AD? You say yes, and it configures it for you. So now you have your ASP.NET app that authenticates against Azure AD, and it works beautifully. You're like, yeah, I'm the boss here. I'm doing everything. And now your manager comes and says, you know what? This app now needs to call into Graph or needs to call into SQL or needs to go and get access tokens for another API. We're like, okay, I already have my user signed in. So all I have to do now is go and get his token. You're like, okay, how do I do that? And there is no way. There's no way you can do that because we created this thing called ASP.NET Identity, which was its own thing, living independent of the Microsoft Identity platform. And then you had to download MSAL. We talked about MSAL, the Microsoft Authentication Library, and then implement MSAL as a separate step. But now you have to re-authenticate the user for them to be able to go and acquire tokens, which was a stupid experience. And we heard the feedback. People heard the feedback. So our team went and created this kind of a unified experience with Microsoft Identity.web. That's the new library called Microsoft Identity.web, which is built on top of MSAL. So it's not a new implementation or a different implementation. And marries the two, the authentication of the user and then the token acquisition and the token management in a very efficient way. So you use the same library to sign in, and then you use the same library to go and acquire a token for whatever resource you want to call. So if Marsha can do it, then I'm telling you, Bob can do it too, according to the slide. Okay, so Microsoft Identity.web is supported on any solution built on top of ASP.NET Core 3.1 and later. So if you are still using ASP.NET Core 2.2 or earlier, then I'm sorry you have to go with the old ways. But give us feedback if you want to see that. If you want to see Microsoft Identity.web supported across older versions of the .NET framework, then the team needs to know. And there's a fantastic GitHub repo where you can go and raise your issues and upvote. So Blazor, WASM, Blazor server, web apps and APIs, gRPC, they're all supported by ASP.NET. And obviously, ASP.NET, MVC, Blazor pages, and Razor pages, and all under the ASP.NET umbrella. If you're not developing on ASP.NET, then we have MSAL for .NET, the old .NET, and prior to 3.1. We have Java, JavaScript, Python, iOS, macOS, and Android. And we also have the Go library on the Go. It's in private public preview. It's on GitHub. So I don't know why they call it private preview when it's on GitHub. But it's early days. So I think that's why they have private there. So people, if they adopt it, there's this disclaimer that it might change. The API may change. And we also released the Node one, which means I need to update my slide here. So 2 weeks ago, we released a Node MSAL, which is for apps that are running on Node.js, whether it's an API or a web app. And we're talking about non-single page apps, right? Node is a server component, like .NET or Java. And finally, if you don't like any of our libraries, which I totally accept it, or if you already have a 3-year-old solution using, say, Passport for Node.js, then there's no reason for you to scrap all that if you want to adopt our identity platform. All you have to do is just point to our endpoints for acquiring ID tokens and access tokens. In some cases, you may need to change something in the configuration, like Passport has an AD component that you need to add. But other than that, it works out of the box. So bring your own libraries. If you're in Python, Ruby, Go, whichever language you want to use, Perl. Can you do Perl with OpenID Connect? I don't know. There must be a library. You know what? The other day, somebody asked me if there was one for, what was the language that they said? Something like Erlang or whatever. I was like, yeah, if there's an OpenID Connect library, we can connect you. And in fact, there were a few packages. So there you have it. Bring your own library. So rather than me going through this wall of text, which I can happily share after that, I think it's better if I show you the new ways of the Microsoft Identity.web. So here I am going to stop this one. Yes, let's cancel this. Let's move up one directory. Let's clear this. Let's minimize this as well. And let's close this node project. And now here I'm going to say .NET new. We'll call it, we're going to make a web app. Is it a web app? I think it's a web app. Auth will say single org. So I'm going to use, if I can type, we're going to use Azure AD for this one, but I could say single org B2C, same thing. It will configure stuff for us, and then I will give it a name. So we'll say 6-figure dev demo. And this will actually bootstrap everything we need, apart from the 2 last bits that I will show you. So cd6. And now I will open this in code. And let's see what we have. Let's jump into the libraries first. So the CS Prods has 2 packages called Microsoft Identity.web and the UI. The UI brings the sign-in, the sign-out pages, so you don't have to implement them. They're built into the framework or the library itself. We'll say yes to this one because we're running in a bit. Next, we'll look into our app settings. And you'll see there's like some stub values there. This one doesn't change. This one remains happily the same, no matter whether you're running multi-tenant or single-tenant. Well, if you're running multi-tenant, then you have to put common there. Domain, we'll change that to be my domain. So see matskas.onmicrosoft.com. Then for the tenant ID, we will go and grab it from Azure AD. So let's go and do that. Let's create a new one called 6-figure dev.net. Now we'll register this one. So now I'm going to grab the client ID and let's put this side by side. So let's grab the client ID here. And let's grab the tenant ID, my directory. So this GUID is the same for this one as well. So same thing. And then I need to configure my authentication here to say, you know what? There's going to be a web app that I need to sign in users at. So we'll add the platform. We're doing web. So we'll click on web. And now I need to add the redirect URI. Remember, it needs to match the app. So we know that Kestrel is running at port 5001. So HTTPS localhost 5001. Too many numbers. And then here I will say sign in OIDC. And that matches that. In effect, the ASP.NET Core framework is expecting the callback path to be that. So we need to match this. I'll select that. And now we are done. So technically I can say .NET run and it will authenticate us. But let's go and have a look at the code, because I did say it's a single line of code. So let's minimize that. Let's maximize this. And inside configure services, we're calling the services.add authentication with the OpenID Connect defaults. And then below that, we say, well, it's going to be a Microsoft Identity for a web app. And that's not one line. So maybe I lied, or maybe I didn't. Maybe we can do better than that. Let's see. Services.add Microsoft web app authentication. I mean, it's a mouthful, but it does it in one line of code. And then I can pass the default configuration. And yes, that's it. That's a single line of code. So see, I didn't lie. So with that single line of code, it means that the app will prompt me to authenticate as soon as I run it. And then the UI down here will prompt me for, will take me to the sign-in page. And then down here, we just have an extra line of code, which was already configured for us. But let's say if you didn't have any authentication in this app, this is what it takes to configure. It's one line of code, then 4 lines, 5 lines, and 6 lines of code. That's all you need to add in any existing ASP.NET app. Now there's one more, okay? There's one more for the UI, which is, it's a fair thing to say. So here, there's a login partial, and you can copy paste this verbatim, and it will work. Now, you can customize it, you can make it look and feel as you like, but the key here is that there's an area called Microsoft Identity. That's the expected value. There's a controller called account, which doesn't exist here. It's in the DLL. And then there's an action. There's a sign in and a sign out action. This is all supported here. So there you have it. Let's save the startup because I did those changes. And then let's run the app to prove the point. .NET. Hey, Code with Sean. How you doing, buddy? He's just joined us on the stream, I see. So yeah, welcome. Guess what I'm talking about? Take a guess. .NET Run. Talking about .NET and identity. And not just .NET, any framework, any library. Okay, so it's running. No errors over there, which is an exciting start. We haven't screwed up our config. So Control plus, it will open that, or Control click, and there you go. It prompts us for authentication. So let's select the right account. Again, it will prompt us for the profile permissions here, which we want to give consent to. I will say accept. And lo and behold, in 5 lines of code, I was able to add authentication, which is amazing. I like the fact that it is simple enough to implement. Now, you might say, well, Chris, that is the very simple scenario of all the scenarios that you could present, and that's absolutely right. But, you know, we haven't taken away anything. Where you still have access to all the underlying mechanism and all the underlying packages. So if you want to crack open your JWT token and go and look through the claims, if you want to do stuff at token reception to enrich the token before it gets passed into the identity claims within the user object, then you can do that. You can, have access to the account controller to customize things. And since you're using MSAL, you still have access to the underlying MSAL capabilities. But the nice thing is that if you just want to do authentication and grabbing tokens, then that's all you have to do. Okay, so if you want to grab tokens, let's go back into the code and see how you would do it, because you guessed it only takes a few more lines of code and you're done. So here, let's open our codes, and I'm going to say, you know what? I don't only want to sign in users, but I want to get tokens for Graph or something else, my APIs. So down here, now I can say, you know what? Dot enable token acquisition to call downstream API. You know, the last time I demoed this, somebody said, why is it called downstream API? It should be upstream API. I'm like, it's technicalities, man. You can use it, call it whatever you want. It's the fact that you can call another API, and somehow you designate that it is further down the stream, okay? So call it upstream API, call it downstream API. The whole point is that you get it for free. In fact, not only there, but you can also say what kind of scopes do you want to present for the first time. You can go with null, because right now we don't really know the scopes. But not only that, it doesn't stop there. It also provides you with built-in token caching. So in the past, MSAL would allow you to implement a token cache on top of MSAL, and it will do most of the heavy lifting, but you still have to serialize and deserialize from that token cache. Now we give that to you for free. So you can say, while I'm testing locally, I want to use my in-memory token cache, but when I go to production, I want to have a distributed token cache. And please choose wisely here, because if you go with a session token cache and you decide to scale horizontally on Azure Web Apps, you're gonna lose that token cache. So usually go with the distributed one, and anything that implements the AI distributed cache can actually be used. And I think out of the box, we support SQL, storage, we added Cosmos. What else is there? Redis as well. So all these things take like 3 lines of code, you add them at the top of your services, so you register your services, and then they become available to you there. And not only there, do not stop there, we have more. So you can actually say, I want to add downstream APIs. Now, this is pretty cool. If you have a service that wraps around an API that does HTTP calls to some endpoint, you can register those services here. And when you dependency inject those into your controllers, then they will automatically get their access token assigned to them, so that you'll have an authorization header with a bearer plus the token assigned to them, because that's all handled for you by the Microsoft Identity Web Library. You can have as many as you want. You can have like 10 of them down here. Now, you don't have to do it here. You can always do it inside your code. So if I stop here, let's stop there. And then if I go into, say, my index.cshtml, then in here, I can say, you know what, I need to access a token, right? I need to go and grab a token. So private token acquisition. It will say, I don't know what you're talking here. Let me save this one. They will say, I don't know what you're talking about. Or does it say that private token acquisition, It took a while for OmniSharp to wake up, but I'll say yes. And I can inject that into here. Oh, that's the index model? Oh, okay. Did I? Does it name index model? Okay, it's a page model. Okay, cool. So here in the constructor, I can say token acquisition, token acq. And then down here, I can inject it. Equals token acq. And now I can say on get token acquisition dot go and get access token for the user. So it will do on behalf of the user, go and get me the token for whatever it is. So as long as I have the right permissions, then it's awesome. And it also has some other built-in features like get access token for app and reply with forbidden. So you don't have to wrap it up. Now, from an API perspective, if you're building an API, then we also provide you with a code to validate that the incoming HTTP request has the right tokens, the right access token. It has a token, has the right access token. So it was issued by the right person. It hasn't expired. And now, or person, I meant identity provider. And then it will also check for the scopes. And that happens in one line of code. Do you want me to show you that? Do you want me to show you that? Why not, right? It's free. Yes. It's free. Why not? So let's do this. Let's go one level up. One level up. And that'll be the penultimate demo here, or ultimate demo. Let's see. How are we doing with time?
We got all night.
I like that. So let's do .NET new. New API. Is it web API? Can't remember. It must be web API. And then we'll say auth single org. And then we'll give it a name. 6 dev API. 6-figure dev. Let's be right with the names, you know? API. So it will create that for us. We'll bootstrap the authentication. And then I will go into the 6. We have 2 of them now. And then code. Let's open it up and see what happens there. There will be a lot of consistencies with what we saw so far. That's the wrong maximization. Let's maximize this. Dark theme has its downsides as well, I guess. So here in the packages, we don't have a web.ui. It's a freaking API, so there's no UI. Don't expect that. In the startup, very similarly to what we had before, but instead of saying web app, we'll say services.ads Microsoft's web API. I like to go with my single liners, right? So we need to pass the configuration. And then if I go to one of my controllers, you notice at the top we have authorize, which is checking for an incoming authorization header. And then down here, we have verify user has any accepted scope. So once the token has passed the confirmation that it has the right signature, it was issued by Azure AD, hasn't expired, through the middleware, it will arrive here. And now, instead of having to write 35 lines of code to open the JWT token, somebody asked to talk about, and going through the claims and mapping the claims to the ones that you need to check, all you have to say is, hey, check that we have the right scopes. And then here it's checking for this scope. We can have an array of scopes. So it could be graph user.read, and it could be mail.read, and then calendar.read or events.read. All of them will be checked. And then you can either get a 403 if you don't have the right scopes, a 401 if you're not authenticated, which you won't even hit this point, or your data back, depending on where you are. That's a single line of code again to do the magic for you. A lot of abstraction that has taken place to make your lives a lot easier, because the most common scenarios would be covered by these 6 lines of code. And there might be more advanced scenarios there, but to get started, to get off the ground, it is pretty straightforward. So that's it. And finally, I'm going to do a quick demo around Graph. So if you haven't used Graph and you don't know what Microsoft Graph is, you know what, when I first joined Identity, I was like, Graph, it must be GraphQL. So I started looking at GraphQL and I couldn't find anything on the Microsoft products. I'm like, what is this Graph? And then I found Microsoft Graph. I was like, okay, that must be it. But where is Graph used? If you are using any of the Microsoft products today, you're probably getting Graph in very many places. Best example is Outlook. If you go to Outlook to type an email, then it prompts you, or it pops up with a number of people that you want to probably send an email. That list of people comes from the People API, and it looks for the 10 most common collaborators with you or with your team or anyone that you work with in your organization. So since I send most of my emails to JP and Hannah and Todd from my team, the first 3 names are always these. So it tries to be efficient and clever by saying, based on the data that I have for you as a user, this is where this is what I'm going to present you. It's one of the many things that you can do with Graph. The other day, somebody asked me, is it possible to fire off a function based on new data being uploaded onto OneDrive? Now, I know that OneDrive is covered by the Graph API. I was like, well, there must be some Graph capability there that I can use. And lo and behold, there's a Graph notification or there's a Graph webhook that you can create for certain APIs. Not everything is covered, but OneDrive luckily was covered. That meant that it's actually the second blog post that we have on our series on on our channel. But it means that with the Graph SDK now, I can listen for files being uploaded to OneDrive. And as soon as that happens, I can fire off an Azure function that copies the data across, puts it into storage, and then does some other magic. But the whole point there is that I can be super efficient by relying on Graph to send me a notification. So rather than hammer polling my OneDrive for any changes and then having to maintain that state of all the files in that OneDrive directory, I say, pay close attention to this drive, and then every time that something changes, send me the notification, and I can go and do whatever I want with it. And that's efficient computing, efficient programming. It only took a very few lines of code. It took me more time to work out the webhooks rather than actually doing it. And now with support for event hubs as well, it means that the process is even easier because the Graph hooks hook directly into Event Hub, and then you have to listen to Event Hub, and you can do whatever you want with it, which is brilliant. It opens up the road for so many things. So if you want to get started with Graph, just head out to ak.ms /GE, and there, did I? Okay. It thinks I'm in the mobile because I'm so maximized here. Like, what is this UI? Did it change the UI since the last time I used it? And as you can see, it knows that I signed in. Remember, I've signed into my directory over here. So it's like, oh, wait a minute. You have an MSOL session somewhere over there. You have a cookie. Let me use it. So here, it signed me with that same user, which is cool. Now I can go and get my profile, and you can see what the query looks like. You can see what the results look like. So you can see the raw response. You can actually get the beta endpoint, which has more data. There you go. Came back with all the information. But you know what's super cool? Now your boss says, yeah, we like that data. Go and implement it. You can say, yeah, sure. It will take me 3 days. Ta-da. All the code there for you. In fact, you can change to JavaScript. So you can do it with JavaScript. And in fact, if you want to be even, one step further, you can say, you know what? How about if we use the toolkit? They have a Graph toolkit. Check this out. So the Graph toolkit is JavaScript components that allow you to quickly integrate with certain APIs in Graph. So you can see here, just signed in. Like, let's see, can I get his agenda? Oh, check this out. It's you download the toolkit, and I have a blog post about that. Then you say, I want to use this kind of tag to go and get some of this agenda. And then they will get it for you, and it will render it like this, which is amazing. You can see what the JS and the CSS looks like. You can even customize the look and feel. So you can also have your own templates down here. But you can have dark theme, for example, which I didn't know it existed. This is awesome. Like, you don't have to do any work. Like, Graph will do all the heavy lifting. And what is even better is that we work with them to say, hey, I don't want to re-authenticate for Graph. I have already an MSOL authenticated user. So can I just pass that token down, and you guys can do whatever you want with that token? And he said yes. So now you sign in your users, you use MSOL to go and get the Graph token, and then you pass that Graph token, and they can do whatever they want with it. So you don't have to re-authenticate users, or you don't have to do it behind the scenes. And you can be clever to your boss by saying, it took me 3 days to write my Graph queries, because, it's not just that. Let's go back to the Graph Explorer, right? I said value, but you can also do select. So this one is not probably the best. Let's go to profile and say, you know what, I want to do run. No, sorry, here. So you can say select. Usually it comes with some clever, you know what, is it that? Select. And you can say what you want to select from there, and it will do, it will improve the query for you. I can't remember the select, is it ID? Might not be right. Nope, that's not the right query. I think it's is this one. No autocomplete for, what does it say? Suggestions available. There you go. Activities. We'll be right. this, and then from there, I think you can do, there you go. Damn, filter. Oh, I didn't have any. You know what? I didn't have the right scopes. None of the approved scopes were found. That's a good error message. Let's go and fix it. It says, what do you want to consent? I can actually consent to these permissions from here. So I can say consent. I say, okay, you have to consent it with the right account. And then I will say accept. And now I can run the activities. Although it says we haven't passed the filter yet. So what do we want the filter to be? Let's see what the activities are, and then we can say, I don't have any activities because it's the test account, obviously. Duh. But see, if you want to play with this one, it tells you what kind of permissions you need to have there. So, yeah, my brain's a bit, so select. Okay, so that's, you know what, I think it should be this. But you get the gist of it. By request, I recognize. Filter. As you can see, I don't play with graph too much. Or I let the, so who's taking this to their boss tomorrow? I don't know, who's taking their boss tomorrow? So that's graph. It allows you to do all the things, and it comes with all the predefined kind of queries. Scott Hanselman did a nice demo at Build last year where he used the presence API from graph to check what his status was at work, like if he was in a meeting or if he was available based on his calendar, and then he would change the lights in his room based on that information. So from graph, he would do a query. The query would look at the status, and then that would change his lights all programmatically, which is brilliant. I can have red lights so the girls know that they can't come into the room if I am speaking to you guys. So some pretty cool things to do with the Graph API. And that's me. So if you like what you saw, and if you want to learn more about identity, then make sure to follow us on the 4 to 5 show, subscribe, become a friend. We stream every Tuesday and Wednesday and Friday. Tuesdays and Fridays are usually end-to-end scenario. Today we had our very good friend Seth Juarez, who talked about machine learning and how you can use identity to protect your data sets, and RBAC to only give permission to your data scientists to do certain operations, like not spinning up super expensive resources to run your machine learning models, which was brilliant. And we learned so many things with Seth. So it's not just us talking about identity all the time. And sometimes people like, that was totally unrelated to identity. But I was like, yeah, it was related to identity because your machine learning models are running on top of your data, which are sitting on your storage data lake somewhere, and you need to protect access. So even though you don't see identity left, right, and center, there's always somewhere behind the scenes. So thank you very much for listening to me ramble about identity. Appreciate your help and your questions. And I will share the links now to everything that I talked about. So you can find most of the stuff are on, we blog about most of the things. So if you go into aka.ms 425 show /blog, you'll find all our blogs. Usually every time that we find an end-to-end scenario that's not covered by docs or samples, we will put both the samples and the blog, the step-by-step instructions for you out there. Then we have the Twitch channel, and we have a fantastic Discord community, so aka.ms. So if you have questions, it's not just us answering these. We have a whole community of over 250 people that can answer things. Someone's asking what the 4 to 5 show mean. So it has two meanings. When we initially started doing the stream, JP, who's my partner in crime, said, let's do it at 10 a.m. I was like, yeah, let's do it at 10 a.m. That sounds very reasonable. But he's East Coast and I am West Coast. So 10 a.m. for him is 7 a.m. for me. So before you ever commit or agree on times, check the time zone. And the 4 to 5 became HTTP code too early. It means that it's too early. So if you ever receive an HTTP error 425, it means that your query came too early and there's no data. But it also has a second meaning. 425 is the area code for Redmond. And since Microsoft is based here in Redmond, we are the Redmond show. So take it as you like. We like both. I like the geeky version of the 425 because we're thinking like, should we call it 404? Should we call it 401, which all had negative connotations, but 425 really captured the feeling of those shows. Yeah, we don't have any kettle. Is it kettle? Yes, 418.
Yeah, I think that's teapot.
Teapot, not kettle. So close.
Yeah, so chat, if you've got any additional questions for Christos, it looks like we're wrapping up here.
Yeah.
Christos, keep sharing your screen. That we forgot to mention that Clayton will get antsy because it'll mess up the camera positioning. But if we need to switch back to your
no
screen,
worries.
we certainly can.
I don't want to mess everyone's stuff. Yeah.
Feel free to share links, ask questions in chat, folks. I tune into the 425 show as often as I can. I find that watching the streamers throughout the day makes these at-home days a little bit easier to bear. It helps to hear other people working on fancy technology stuff. Clayton and I will be back with John Ash tomorrow night for the live coding live stream Wednesday night at 10 p.m. or 8 p.m. to 10 p.m. Where I have been inspired. I think we'll be working on one of my personal projects and implement some identity stuff. So if you like what you saw here, you can watch us struggle through it again tomorrow night. We will be back next month. We have a program for Azure DevOps for .NET, Fall into the Pit of Success with Jeffrey Palermo. So be sure to RSVP for that. Join us on Meetup and follow along in the discussions there. We've also got a Facebook group and a Twitter account and so forth for the stpete.net Meetup. You can join us and do all the things there. If you want to volunteer yourself or a coworker to present for the stpete.net Meetup, we do this every month on the second Tuesday of the month at 7 p.m. If there's a certain topic or a certain presenter you'd like to hear from, let us know. Drop a line in chat. Christos, do you have anything else upcoming? You've got plenty of work still going on the 425 show, I'm sure.
Man, we got an insane amount of work on the 425. So in fact, at 6:30, I'm going at 6:15, I'm going live on the 425 show to talk about Node.js and MSAL. Because it dropped last week. I was like, I need to test this thing. So I took it for a spin. And today we're going to build an API with it. Tomorrow at 8 a.m., I'll be co-hosting with our friend Stefan on some IT stuff. Usually it's Stefan and Daniel that they do the IT stuff, but one of them is busy. So I'll be covering. Then I also have a user group, or I have a conference, Azure Global on Thursday. So I'll be doing that. And then I have some Channel 9 recordings tomorrow. I think this week is probably going to be the biggest and the most time I spent on screen doing stuff with the community. But it's part of the developer advocacy, and that's what we signed for. So I'm really excited. Yeah, so it's all good. Really excited to be able to speak to you guys and to learn, hear your feedback. Like, I will be more curious to hear what were your thoughts for the demos and what we talked today. Are too easy, too simple, and not realistic enough, or this is freaking awesome, I want to do it. I wish we had this for Java or JavaScript, because everybody says like, why can I not do it in one line in JavaScript? Like, well, let the team know and we'll try to do it, because that's what we're here for. That's the feedback I want to hear. But it's helping developers be more secure. And after having done my fair share of stupidities in the past as being a naive and young developer, like one day talking about secretless apps, my blog is running on Ghost, and I usually, back in the good old days, I would push my code in a zip, and then I would push it up to Kudu for Azure Web Apps, and it will unzip it and run it. It was a Node.js app. And somebody from the Azure Web Apps team saw my blog and said, why are you doing it like that? Just push it to GitHub, and then connect your GitHub to your Azure web app, and it will do CI/CD from GitHub. I was like, that's amazing. I will do it. So that same night, I went and pushed my code to GitHub, and then it pushed it to Azure Web Apps. And I was like, yeah, it's working. It's amazing. Then the next morning, I woke up and I had an email from SendGrid. Now, SendGrid is the tool I use inside Ghost to receive notifications and emails every time somebody signs up. And SendGrid goes, you hit your monthly quota of 20,000 emails. I'm like, that's amazing. Like, I went viral overnight. You know, it must have been the last blog post I wrote. Well, it also had a list below that said, if you hit your quota, some of the things that could have happened is you disclosing your credentials in GitHub. And at that point, I was like face palming, like, because I put my credentials, I had my SendGrid credentials for my production account inside my config file for the Node.js service. And I pushed it to GitHub. I totally forgot about it. So somebody, I remember how I said, there are bots out there that will scan your GitHub repos for information. So again, it's not identity related, but it's security. And if I can eliminate your secrets, then that's awesome. So lesson learned, I did not go viral. I still had like 1,000 followers on Twitter at the time. So I was like, yeah, unfortunate, but it's just a nice lesson. It didn't cost me anything, which was good because I had an upper limit. So SendGrid allows you to have a free account with a limit, which was good. But at the same time, that could have been, and there have been companies that have pushed credentials to production, or they have pushed API keys to production and public repos, and they were not aware. I remember once I went into a customer, part of the work I did in the field in the UK at Microsoft was called the Azure Workload Optimization. So we would turn up in the morning, we'll get everybody that worked in the team that were involved with the development, deployment, and running of the ops process. And then we would go through a giant checklist of, hey, how do you secure your storage? How do you manage single point of failures? What is your DR scenario? How do you do development? What is your development lifecycle? What do you use for CI/CD? And in one of these conversations, I remember a scenario where the ops guys were there, like, oh, we do infrastructure as code. I was like, that's brilliant. Tell us how you do it. Walk us through the process. So I said, well, we have this ARM template, which is checked in. We don't have any secrets. I was like, okay. We keep the secrets in Excel. I was like, okay, let's ignore that. Somehow they pull it into the ARM template during the deployment. Now, that ARM template would get uploaded into a storage account with the parameters all passed in. So you have the parameters file and the ARM JSON side by side in the storage account. And then they would run a PowerShell script from one of their machines to deploy. It's like, okay, that's brilliant. How do you secure access to your storage account? And they go, it's a public container. And then at that point, everybody in the room just starts looking around because they realize that they were putting all their production secrets, like SQL credentials, their storage keys or whatever that were produced or were necessary for the ARM template, into a public container in storage. And that was the first time that everybody just questioned why they were doing it like that. I was like, why would you do it like this? They didn't know. So
it's because the safest place to hide is in
plain
view.
No. I'm afraid bots don't think that way. Another example is I did a sample app, like an ASP.NET app 3 years ago, and I put it on GitHub. Now, I removed that app registration from the tenant. It didn't exist, so they couldn't really use it for anything. But I got flagged by Microsoft, like one of the tools that we have internally said, hey, you have this public repo that has a client credential for your app registration. Fix it now. You have a week to do it. Otherwise, we'll take it down. So I can't even remember that I had that. So anyway, I went there. It was safe. I had wiped out the credentials right after I deployed it. But at the same time, we have tools as well that protect from developer stupidity because everybody just doesn't think at the moment. So eliminating secrets is probably more important than doing some other things. Identity is cool, but I find that being able to use Azure AD, managed identities, and Key Vault to protect all that's another exciting topic that I like to talk about. So maybe in the near future we can do this one as well.
Oh yeah,
that'd be great. So with that, we'll be sure to. So we keep our secrets public. We store passwords in plain text.
In your storage account, so I can know where to find them.
We roll our own identity services.
Yes, I see that you've been paying attention for this past hour and a half. I'm living happy. Mission accomplished. Not.
Yeah. No. Keep your secret secret.
Cool.
Use the services that are available to us, so that we do not have to build this very complex, secure platform.
Cool. Well, thank you for having me. We've been planning this for a while, so I look forward to hearing the comments. Reach out to us on Discord or the 45 Show or Twitter if you have any questions. And we look forward to seeing what you built with Microsoft Identity.
All right. Thanks so much, Christos. Really appreciate it. With that chat, we'll say goodnight and see you next month. We will raid our friend over at TBD Gamer. Good night, folks.
Good night.